Just off the top of my head, I could tell you the president sued New York State, trying to keep his tax returns and his financial records secret. He sued the state of California, trying to do the same thing. He sued the Ways and Means Committee in the House, trying to do the same thing. He sued the chair of the Oversight Committee, trying to do the same thing. He sued his own bank, trying to do the same thing. He sued a whole other bank. All efforts to keep his tax returns, his financial records, his banking records secret, as various legal and investigative bodies sought to obtain those records. The president has lost in court every step of the way with all of those lawsuits. But tomorrow there will be a Supreme Court case on whether the president's records have to be handed over in response to lawful subpoenas. This is the case in which the president says he is absolutely immune from all legal scrutiny, and therefore nobody can respond to any subpoena that has anything to do with him. That case tomorrow, that historic case tomorrow, is something we'll all be able to listen into live. It is the president's last chance to stop this material coming out before the 2020 election, if ever. And he really has been desperate to stop this material from coming out. He has a whole legal team that is separate and apart from all the other lawyers who represent him on other things that just works full time on trying to keep his finances and his taxes secret. And this case tomorrow involves huge constitutional questions, of course, but it also means we may finally get to see the financial information the president has been fighting to keep secret for years. Here to talk about a very specific piece of it is David Enrich, New York Times business investigations editor. He's the author of Dark Towers, Deutsche Bank, Donald Trump, and an Epic Trail of Destruction. Mr. Enrich, it is great to see you. You're a sight for sore eyes. It's been a long time. Thanks very much for making time tonight.
Thanks for having me.
So remind all of us about the part of this case tomorrow that's going to the Supreme Court that has to do with Deutsche Bank, what the subpoena is and what your reporting indicates might be in that information if it, in fact, ever did have to get handed over to investigators.
Well, I think the starting point is to remember that Deutsche Bank for the past 20 years or so has been really the only mainstream financial institution willing to consistently do business with Donald Trump and his family and his company. And the bank has made over $2 billion in loans to Trump and his companies. It currently is owed about more than $300 million by Trump. And over the course of these decades of doing business with him, they've collected reams of detailed information about not just his finances, but everything, all the materials he used to open bank accounts or to get loans or to convince Deutsche Bank loan officers that he had the money and the collateral to pay back what he was borrowing. And so there are detailed records about his personal finances, kind of a detailed map of how all of his businesses interact, what assets they have, where they've been making money, where their money is going. And of course, just as there would be in any bank, there are detailed records that show where he moves his money. If money comes in big numbers or goes out in big numbers, Deutsche Bank knows about that. And so these subpoenas, which were issued last year by these two congressional committees, seek essentially all of that information that Deutsche Bank is sitting on, including just very detailed transaction by transaction data for just anything over $10,000, for example. And it's looking for this in relation not just to Trump and the Trump organization, but a number of his family members and really all sorts of other companies that he's affiliated with as well.
Now, David, you reported in the Times and in your book that there were essentially people who were assigned within Deutsche Bank to look for signs of money laundering. And you reported that anti-money laundering experts inside Deutsche Bank repeatedly raised red flags about entities controlled by President Trump and by his son-in-law, Jared Kushner. Those experts told you they recommended that the bank should file suspicious activity reports with the government, flagging potential money laundering by the president. But those concerns were ignored by bank executives, by higher-ups. Obviously, that's potentially super explosive material. Would you expect that the subpoenaed material that's going to be fought over in court tomorrow would contain information about those kinds of internal deliberations related to the president?
100%. I think that's definitely one of the things that's sought by the subpoenas. In fact, there's a particular paragraph in these subpoenas which have been made public through this court fight that specifically asks for any information related to suspicious activity reports that the bank either the bank either filed or was kind of drawn up in draft form to file. And so these are records that the bank really has not said anything about, where we've relied on the word of one very brave whistleblower who went public to discuss her concerns about this and was punished for that. And so I think there's a very good chance that were the Supreme Court to shoot down the Trump legal argument, that very detailed information would be coming out about the suspicious transactions or the potentially suspicious transactions that these anti-money laundering officers found and what the nature of them was, who the money was going to, why they were so suspicious, and importantly, why Deutsche Bank officials up the food chain decided to overrule their kind of lower level employees and say, we are not going to report this to the government, which was really, it was just an extraordinary set of circumstances. And I think this court case presents one final chance to finally hear the full story, at least before the election.
And David, this obviously is not a subpoena to the president that he is defying. Right. I think if that was the case, we all know how that would come out. Even if he was told to obey the subpoena, he still wouldn't. He'd defy the court. We'd have a constitutional crisis. In this case, on the Deutsche Bank stuff, this is a subpoena to Deutsche Bank. If the court rules that Deutsche Bank should obey the subpoena and hand over this material, do you feel confident that they would?
Well, it's dangerous to make predictions like that, and I've been burned in the past by thinking I know how things will work out and then being wrong. In this case, my reporting and talking to people inside Deutsche Bank indicates very strongly that they will comply with this. I think they've had more than a year now to assemble the materials that are sought in these subpoenas. My understanding is they're more or less ready to do so at the push of a button were the Supreme Court to give them the all clear to do so. And so that would mean that sometime over the summer, Deutsche Bank would be delivering just troves of detailed information about Trump's records and also the bank's own internal records about the Trump relationship to Trump's bitter political enemies in Congress.
Wow. David Enrich, New York Times business investigations editor, the author of Dark Towers, Deutsche Bank, Donald Trump, and an Epic Trail of Destruction, which I read every word of and loved and highly recommend. David, thank you for being here. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Rachel.